Hi, I'm Ian Buchanan. I'm a Principal Solutions Engineer for DevOps, and thanks for joining me for today's webinar. Now, maybe you're just getting started with DevOps and learning the jargon, or maybe you're an experienced DevOps practitioner. If you've attended many DevOps days and read the Phoenix Project and have a functioning continuous delivery tool chain, then you're probably towards the top of the level of expertise. But for both audiences, I'm here to talk through some ways you can improve. I have a unique job inside of Atlassian. I work with our largest technology partners, some of whom will be featured today, as well as our largest customers to help them understand how to use Atlassian products in their tool chains. Now, based on recent customer surveys and my own personal interactions with customers and partners, I'll be sharing 4 integrations that are critical for many teams to deliver software both faster and better. Now, while I will be talking about 4 specific integrations, these really reflect 4 key practice areas. And you might need all 4 if you're really just getting started, or you might just take inspiration from just one. Either way, I really think there's something here for everybody. So with that, let's kind of take a look at what's coming today. So I'll be covering key practices and tools that we recommend you consider as you establish and grow DevOps in your organization. We'll start with why an integrated tool chain matters. Next, we'll walk through 4 key integrations and tips about how to approach these areas. So we'll be looking at Agile Testing, DevSecops, feature flagging, and then the wonderful idea of monitoring and observability. Okay, I'll come back and recap and make sure that you've had a chance to check out all of the resources. And then finally, I'll be getting to answering some of your questions in the Q&A section. Now, earlier this year, Atlassian ran a market survey. So not just with our customers, but from a broad perspective. And the results were pretty interesting. We discovered this very interesting contrast. So 90% are leaning into DevOps and getting into the groove. And that's a lot of people reporting that DevOps has a direct and positive impact on their business in the form of better products and faster delivery. But on the right side, we still see there are a lot of barriers to implementation. And one of those is this interaction between practices and tools. There are hundreds of practices to try, and for each one, there might even be like a dozen options for supporting tools. But fitting tools together can become a barrier to trying new practices. So I think the best way to kind of reconcile this is that tools haven't really fully caught up to DevOps. Too many tools start from a set of outdated assumptions, like the tools are for specialized roles, and that teams just adopt these things at kind of a big bang adoption. So the Atlassian way, the way that we view tool chains is to start where you are. We think that an integrated tool chain means that the tools are sharing data with each other, which we hope is a deeper reflection of how your team works. This is a real contrast to the highly specialized roles that would characterize waterfall-style development. And with Jira, Bitbucket, and other Atlassian tools as a foundation, we work with our partners to build solutions that empower teams so they can implement a flow that works with your level of maturity and that can grow with you as you evolve. So if you're just getting started, it might be hard enough to embrace user stories, sprints, and daily stand-ups. And at this kind of egg stage, you might start to use a tool like Jira just for coordinating teamwork inside this kind of shell of your own team, while still doing handoffs with other functions and tools, but maybe in a more manual way. Later, we would kind of hope that you would discard the shell and become a tadpole. So exploring sort of tail techniques like Agile testing and continuous delivery that do require a bit more cross-functional collaboration. And as new forms of collaboration and automation are built into your team, you'll want tools to reflect those practices with deeper integration. Then when you become a fully grown frog, you might not need all of those tail tools anymore. The functions of testing and delivery should become so integrated that it may not make sense to carry heavy test planning or delivery management tooling. So too, you might need new legs in the idea of observability and feature flags. Now, while the life cycle of a frog has all of these different forms, we're still talking about the same organism. And by the same token, we think you should have a relatively stable team, but have the ability to change practices and tools as your context changes. So this is what you're going to be able to get from the Atlassian ecosystem. First, you can adjust your tools and practices to fit with your team's unique needs. So whether you're in the egg, tadpole, or frog stage, we've got the right thing for you. And just because something works for Netflix doesn't mean it's going to be a great fit for you. Conversely, Netflix and other DevOps unicorns often find themselves in unique situations that require novel tooling. Now, we also want to consider that standardizing too soon or too broadly can destroy the variation that creates value where it's needed most. I mean, I guess the way I'd have you think about it is that variation is what makes you different from your competitor. Don't give that up too easily. Next, we want to enable a whole and unified team. And we think you can help break down silos and get over that mindset of some people are dev and some people are ops. Tools can put up walls, but they can also help tear them down. And we see Jira as the hub of work that you can use to customize to your own needs, down to the interacting tools. For instance, integrations help information sharing, which means less need to switch context to another tool or manually enter data through just copy and paste. And we can turn on capabilities like real-time automation so that teams can work where they are most productive. And this is especially valuable for DevOps as speed is so critical to achieve that end goal of better products faster. Now, this last point helps with pragmatism. You don't need to perfectly fit with your team or have perfect sharing. You need good enough. And our ecosystem allows you to discover and experiment quickly so that you can find that right balance, rather than performing long-running tool evaluations that are often more political than empirical anyway. In our marketplace, you can find all kinds of apps and integrations to connect to your market-leading platforms, or apps by innovative marketplace partners that you can try for free. As you learn and grow, you can try the tools that make most sense for your team. So here's the first mention. You can find a link to some of our top DevOps integrations and apps in various DevOps categories that we're covering today in the resources box in this webinar's console. Now for this webinar, I've chosen to highlight 4 partners that I've worked with. There's Zephyr for Jira from the SmartBear vendor. They're in the space of Agile testing. There's Sneak for DevSecops. There's LaunchDarkly for feature flagging, and Dynatrace for monitoring and observability. Let's start with Agile testing. Now, I think many people may either experience today or remember that there's a traditional approach that treats testing as the dedicated function of just one team. And this QA team is often called in at the end of a software project and expected to bake in the quality by testing it. But I think Agile and now DevOps have made us rethink that traditional approach. Now testing is something that we want included throughout the entire process. So really, if I just boil it down, Agile testing is the answer to how do I incorporate testing throughout my software development process. It's about having a better quality product, not just finding bugs. And so we think about Agile testing as including testing at every phase of the software development lifecycle. That's going to mean from design and planning throughout deployment and software delivery, even into production, with the surprising idea of testing in production. Now, as the name suggests, Agile testing didn't begin with DevOps. It began earlier. But I think it's an inspiration for how many DevOps pioneers looked at this kind of idea of breaking with long-held wisdom that the only way to find more defects before release is to spend more time in testing. No, we can break those economics and get to faster and better. Now, by integrating testing into every step, Agile teams have proven that they can reduce lead time. That means the time from when they start a feature until when it's ready for production. They discover bugs even before code is written by looking for creative ways to explore specifications with users directly. And they create more tests than typical teams because tests are built as part of the specification, often as examples or acceptance criteria that can later be folded into automation frameworks. And then, of course, they do use automation to make sure that they can run tests on demand. And now I know a lot of developers associate that faster and better with simple test automation, but I think the real magic comes from detecting defects early. Paper prototypes avoid all the CSS, HTML, and JavaScript code that would be written to find the same defect implemented in code. Or even for finding pure coding problems, it's easier to fix the same problem in a 2-week sprint than it is after a quarter of development time. So I really assert that the key to Agile testing is fast feedback, whether powered by paper or automation. But how might Agile testing work in our digital world? If you are using Jira, then this is Zephyr, an Agile testing app by SmartBear that you can find in the Atlassian marketplace. Now, Zephyr is built on top of Jira, so the tests themselves are an issue type that fit with other kinds of issues that you'll use in your Agile work, like stories and defects. It means you can leverage existing Jira components and labels to unify testing across these different kinds of issue types, so that all of the reporting is using Jira reporting. You really get to roll all of those things up together. And then you can link Jira stories and defects to tests without having to learn some kind of new user interface. Remember that I said Agile testing combines testing into every part of development? Well, in Zephyr, that means that we plan tests for sprints and releases, just like we plan stories and defects. Here, we're looking at a cycle summary view in Jira that lets us know what manual tests we'll be running during this sprint. We can reuse the same tests across multiple sprints and releases with this test cycles idea. And we can look at Jira releases, and then testers can align themselves to those releases and those goals. Now, most importantly, we don't have to be testers to know what's going on here. That's really important to breaking down silos. Now, to pick up on that point, here's a view of testing that's available to everyone on the software team. Now, it's important that Zephyr does enable specific Jira dashboards with roll-up of relevant data for different audiences, like a business level versus developers. But they can all use the same platform, and that really helps to create a unified view and a centralized place to view and manage testing. Now, earlier I also explained that test automation is really critical here. It's really not just about getting faster, but about providing feedback faster. And so it's really important to make sure that we integrate results from human efforts and automation in a way that everybody can get at it. So here's an example of that from the Zephyr menu in Jira. Zephyr for Jira supports integrating with multiple test automation frameworks like Selenium, Cucumber, Tricentis Tosca, and UFT. And that means test results from continuous delivery pipelines are included in the fast feedback to the whole team. And don't just get buried in Jenkins on some obscure page. Now, when we asked SmartBear for some ideas about how to think about testing, they told us these interesting points. Designing for a shared value of testing throughout the process. So this is kind of moving from tests as just like one team or one person's specialization and that's their entire role, to it's something that is the whole team's responsibility. So in the test design or planning stage, testing should be part of the whole conversation. All of the stakeholders who are part of the development process can help define what testing a component looks like, so that each step of the way, there's complete visibility and a shared understanding of where that testing comes into play. Now, DevOps analysis of failures becomes quicker if they know the purpose and the steps of the test. Also, Smart Bear told us that generating centralized and multi-purpose reporting is really important. And that's because reports should be centralized, visible to everyone on the team, even as it's able to cater to specific needs like stakeholders. And we want to make sure that DevOps can see the things that are relevant to them as opposed to what might be relevant to a PM or a CTO. And then it's important to integrate each system in DevOps workflow. So that means Agile testing should be incorporated into all of the different systems that are connected to testing. So that's automation frameworks and CI/CD platforms. Now, one way to achieve this is to begin with identifying your source of truth, oftentimes Jira, and then identify which integrations are critical to help understand the flow of test data. Now that's just a teaser, but if you really think that Agile testing is the thing that your team needs, then please check out the Zephyr for Jira test management app. Zephyr in general has a big set of Agile testing resources that you can check out to understand how that works with them. And then we've got some links to even broader Agile testing practices and apps, mainly from the Atlassian marketplace. So please check out the resources box. So another aspect of quality that's increasingly becoming important for modern teams is security. And that's what brings us to this idea of DevSecops. Now, if you remember, I set up Agile testing as this idea of a kind of shift from testing as one person or one team's responsibility to a whole team responsibility. Well, that same shift is happening for security. So we're seeing that the very idea of DevSecOps is about a shift in who is doing the security checks. Now, I know for a lot of orgs, security is still performed in a very outside-in way. The shift to Agile and then DevOps means releases are coming more frequently, and that's making those traditional outside-in security practices really different. It's just hard to keep up with that pace. And so all of that means that increasingly security is getting like the problems that are that they would normally detect through those traditional techniques are detected way too late. So that's why there is a real shift in terms of when security is involved in the software flow, just like what has happened in Agile testing. Now, I think that really means that DevSecOps is simply the answer to how can we bake security into our software development process. And that, just like testing, means that we're building security into every phase. Now, what I think kind of confirms this is that Gartner has said that ideally this is done without reducing the agility or speed of developers or requiring to leave their development tool chain. And that's why it's really important that we have a new set of tools that fit in. So our friends at Snyk are experts in this DevSecOps area. And one thing that they told us that they hear from their customers is that most processes and cultural transformations are the main challenges to getting to really good security. So what's really needed is something that we would call shift left. It's moving a lot of those security activities sooner so that you can get faster feedback. And that's how DevSecOps really has come into helping teams reduce their lead time and reducing the amount of security incidents that they see. And like with so many news stories in the press about security leaks, this is something that takes a long time to repair if you do have a security incident. So let's take a look at what that might look like. In the world of integrating security into your pipeline, for us, that would normally include injecting Snyk into your Bitbucket pipeline. Bitbucket pipelines is a tool for running CI/CD. And what we're seeing here, if you can see through lines 12 through 13, or sorry, 8 through 13, is what Atlassian calls a Bitbucket pipe. And that's really just a reusable unit that you can inject into your pipeline. that makes it really easy to configure Snyk. So here we see that all we have to pass in are a few quick parameters, give it some security context, and away we go. First, it scans the source code that we have. This is going to look for are dependencies that we have on open source libraries that may need some security review. Sometimes this stuff is really late bound, right? A library that has been available for a long time may suddenly have a security incident against it, and that's something then we'll want to update as soon as we can. The next layer is that Snyk can actually scan the results of what we created, especially if that's packaging that up into a Docker container. Then what Snyk can provide us here is a bit more information about the layers going into that Docker container and give us more information about context. So here what we're looking at are issues that are at various layers with different levels of severity, so high, medium, and low. And this is really critical because we want to make sure that we can prioritize the issues coming at us. Sometimes there's just so much information overload in security scanning that if we tried to fix it all, it would take us a year before we get anything out the door. But that doesn't mean all of the things that we're finding are of equal priority. So knowing how and when to fix things is really key here, and Snyk helps us find what is most important to fix. So in working with Jay over at Snyk, I asked him for some ideas about how to successfully implement DevSecops. And one of the big things that he told me is that it really begins with a cultural shift. And that's because it's not just the tooling. In a lot of ways, that is the easy thing to solve. Without the right mindset, you just won't get the right results out of adopting these kinds of tools. Another thing is that getting stakeholder buy-in and adopting processes to support across the whole org is really critical. Another one is this idea that security is everyone's responsibility. This is what we call a shared model for security. And it is like what we were talking about in tests, that everyone participates and there is a kind of group responsibility. And I think it's what makes it hard for a lot of security teams to be involved in a model like this, is that people don't act responsibly. But a lot of times that's because it feels like we're just trying to dump an entire responsibility on the team. And we don't really want to have all the devs in a software team become security experts. What they should have is relevant information really early so that they can make informed decisions. And so that's where the tooling and the tie from Bitbucket pipelines into bringing information back into the Bitbucket user interface and then surfacing the most important things in Jira, that's where all of those integrations help. And so if you want to find out more about how those integrations all work together, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the Snyk for Bitbucket and for Jira integrations in the marketplace. You'll find additional Snyk resources that do explain some of those deeper security practices. Next, let's touch on feature flags. Now, like if we've just talked about getting containers ready to deploy and securing that code and getting it into production, then we need to also consider what has changed in how code gets deployed. And one of those important things is to understand this idea of a deployment episode. This is what happens. I mean, if beer were features, this is what happens to far too many teams as they try to go towards a release. The thing is that as they have coupled their ability to get code out the door with the putting features into customers' hands, this really puts a lot of work all at one place. And I know from my own experience that I would have had no confidence getting up on stage at an AWS event if I thought that there was any risk that what I was talking about as a new feature of integration between Jira and AWS CodeStar was behind getting code deployed. No, thankfully, we had a safer way of doing that. And that began with decoupling deployment from release. So what do we mean here? What is a release? A release is when you make a feature available to customers, and a deployment is about moving code into production. Now, how do you separate them? Well, if you have a really big monolithic application, one of the sort of old school techniques that was first described by Dave Farley and Jez Humble in their book on continuous delivery is a notion called blue-green deployments. Now, it's just arbitrary names. Blue and green could be any colors, but it's just the convention that they adopted. And it really just means having two versions of the application and their entire stack in production. Now, at any given time, the router only points to one environment. So the user only sees one of these versions of the product. But if that user, if this router is pointing to blue, then we're free to kind of work on green, make the make the changes that we need in order to get a new deployment out the door. We can make that in the green environment safely, and then once we think we are ready to show the customer those changes, we can flip the router switch and it points to the green environment. Now, I know this really breaks with the traditional notion of sequential environments, right? Like that's getting away from this idea of testing and staging and production as this kind of flow through environments. But I think that's what it takes to get to a more modern idea of switching from or breaking deployment and the coupling to releases. And it just goes to show that all problems in computer science can be solved by yet another level of indirection. And that leads us into what is feature flagging. And it's really about this bigger idea: how do I test and launch new features quickly and safely? So what is a feature flag? A feature flag is really just a decision point in code whose behavior can vary during runtime based on an external input. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's a lot like the router that we put in front of the blue and green environments. But in this case, instead of a router, we have source code. And in this case, the feature flag is the one-click checkout. And if it's true, we go through the top set of code. If it's false, we'll go through the else code. And so that's the separation between sort of the old way and the new way, or A and B, or blue and green. Like all of those differences are then manifest in code as a fancy if statement. So what is feature flagging about? Well, it's another faster and better technique, but this one is about increasing the frequency of deployments while reducing the change failures. Now, what's so important about that is that the more often that we can deploy, the more often we get some of the benefits from the previous things. For example, our security gets increased because speed is sort of the new security. But it also has its own benefit in that we can more frequently test our ability to deploy, and therefore we get out of this headache of configuration drift. We're doing frequent deployments into the production environment, so we know that if there anything has changed, we'll have practiced that very frequently. And that's what helps us virtually eliminate the risk from software releases. So we get to deploy at any time that we feel it's convenient, and release really only when we're ready. And then the more frequent deployments that we're doing help reduce the change failures, because at any given time, we're only deploying a small set of changes. It's easier to reason about what could cause a failure for a smaller change. And it's much easier to roll back if there is a failure. So how do feature flags work? How would you adopt them? Well, here's how they work with LaunchDarkly. This is an integration that you can access from the Atlassian marketplace and wire into Jira. It helps by doing a few things. So one of the things that we're looking at here is that we can create a new feature flag and associate it to this existing Jira issue. We can also associate existing feature flags. So as we're deciding that, oh, maybe this issue actually gets rolled up into something that we want to hide from customers for a while, we can roll all of those up into the same feature flag. And then those feature flags are things that we can see also from the LaunchDarkly side, and start to aggregate the multiple Jira issues that way. And as we do that, these all become something that are clickable, that we can really get back to the full context of the whole user story. We will add those up and then keep those around. And then as we were working together on building integration, similar to the other integrations, we talked to LaunchDarkly about what are some of the best ways that people can do feature flagging. And we got these wonderful 4 pro tips. The first one is that make flag planning a part of feature design. And what that really means is that, like, you have to kind of leave room for the idea that a piece of the UA, the user interface, may get turned on or off. You have to know how you're going to, maybe collapse a section if the feature is hidden. So those are parts of, making sure that the feature flagging is something that's possible in your application. It takes some thought. Now, another one that I, that we have discovered, hopefully not accidentally, but is one that people should know. If you're starting out feature flagging, this can really balloon. We have easily a few dozen feature flags operating inside of Jira at any given time. And as new ones come in and out, it's really critical that you standardize naming so that you know what these feature flags mean, that you can find sets of feature flags that are related to each other much more quickly. And that kind of gets into the next one, is that you're going to want fairly fine-grained feature flags. One of the ideas here about making releases safer means that you really need to narrow the scope of a feature flag so that it's, I don't know, kind of more a binary experiment, right? So that like the reach of this flag in terms of both the user interface and the code paths. And that kind of leads into this next one, because eventually you have to come back and remove the guard points, the if statement that's around a feature flag. And one way to do that is, like, if you can be really disciplined, it's great if you remove it as soon as you're done, right? As soon as you have flipped the flag on for all users, okay, now it's time to go remove the flag. But sometimes it's hard to have that discipline. We find ourselves in many product teams at Atlassian looking at least at every few months, kind of really looking over the feature flags, sometimes discovering ones that we started and then decided that, no, the experiment really isn't worth it continuing anymore, and so we have to take them away then, or some that have been rolled out and we had left in maybe just in case something went wrong, and after a few months, we know by then it's really safe. Now, if you're interested in learning more, please check out the LaunchDarkly for Jira app in the marketplace. And then, of course, check out the additional LaunchDarkly resources. And then even beyond LaunchDarkly, we do have some additional feature flagging integrations in the marketplace. Would really like to have you check those out from the resources section. And that moves us on to rollout and being in production. And so now there's a whole new set of concerns that kick in. And I think that's also the way that, the reason that there's a new term here. So a lot of people have known about logging and monitoring and even analytics for quite some time, but there's this new thought in the DevOps community about observability. What is it? If logging and monitoring have been around forever, is it just DevOps being, jingoistic and coming up with new new terms that everybody has to use? No, I don't think so. I think there's something really new here, and it is a new approach to using the same old tools. And I think this gets us into some of the challenges that people have. So even if there have been tools hanging around, there are new ways of wiring them together. One is back to this faster and better thing that I've been hammering home on, is that a lot of ops teams are still stuck in this mode. Even if they're not involved in the testing or the security aspects, the operations folks have been trained over hard lessons in time that the faster pace of change is dangerous, and so they are often putting brakes on going faster. So we want to kind of help break those things for the operations side as much as we did in talking about Agile testing and DevSecops. And there's also a problem that a lot of the things, the operational characteristics like performance, are often out of band from the CI/CD process. Okay, so continuous deployment actually does check our ability to make a change safely, but things like performance testing are often performed at some other stage, like perhaps even after things have gone into production. And then I think another problem is that a lot of people have trouble making the right trade-offs between features and non-functional characteristics, these operational characteristics. Things like reliability and performance take work. And so making a decision about, well, whether we should build the next feature or work on reliability a little bit has a lot to do with the dev teams and product management of those teams missing critical information from operations. And I think that there's still, like, even though these tools have been around for a long time, there is a high effort to integrate monitoring into so many of these pipeline permutations. So if you are doing testing and staging and production, you really need to get operations tools in there so that you can start sensing things that can go wrong in those earlier environments. Otherwise, those environments really aren't production-like enough. So please do take that more seriously. When I boil it down, I think that means that the monitoring and observability is the answer to the question, how can we find and resolve incidents faster? And to me, that means being much more intentional about how we do monitoring and measurement. So that's why a useful definition of monitoring and observability could be technology or tooling that delivers precise answers about the performance and reliability of applications, the underlying infrastructure, and the experience of all users. And you'll see there's quite an interesting range there, because I think too much of history has been monitoring is only at the infrastructure layer. It's whether you're out of disk space or your CPU utilization. It doesn't say enough about the level of the application, and especially not enough about how users are experiencing that. And that's why I think it's important to understand what monitoring and observability help us get. And they they help us get reduced time to respond to incidents in particular, and they help us reduce change failures, especially if we're applying those things sooner. So what does that look like? If we are using observability tooling, and in this case, if we're integrating Dynatrace into the Atlassian tool chain, then what we'll see is that Dynatrace gets a whole lot of signals from a lot of places. And what it does with that signal is it can help send that information over to Jira to keep the development team aware of what's going on. It brings along a lot of the things that Dynatrace can learn and discover about the environment and bring those over as custom fields. And then it can keep those two sides of that information synchronized. So here we are adding comments on the Dynatrace side that will also synchronize over to the Jira issue itself. Now, I suppose these days a lot of folks have gotten used to saying, hey, Alexa, or okay, Google, or Siri. Well, Dynatrace has folded that kind of thing into its world as well. So we can say, Davis, find the root cause. Now, abstractly, what that means is that Dynatrace is pulling in information. In this case, we're looking at a deployment event that would be emitted by Bitbucket pipelines, and we can correlate that to information that's coming in from Kubernetes to know that the entire, the thing that Bitbucket pipelines kicked off is now finished, and aggregating a whole load of other things. So all of the kinds of metrics and logging tools can feed events into Dynatrace so that its AI, Davis, can help us better find the root cause. And that's a real relief, because a lot of times that whole prioritization problem is caused by getting sent too many signals from our environment. Yeah, we've wired up all this monitoring, but knowing which thing is the thing that we need to go focus on, it can be really difficult. So that's why it's really interesting that Dynatrace has this AI to apply. So I've worked closely with Rob over at Dynatrace on a lot of the integrations that we now have jointly available. And I was asking him about some of the tips that he has for monitoring and observability. And so here are 4 tips that he talked to me about. One is more than just the traditional metrics, logs, and traces, really kind of get into this advanced observability mindset. And that means looking into additional layers of data, like the application's topology, like how does it span out into services and things at different layers of your infrastructure stack. Looking into the code level detail, pulling in user information, experience, and behaviors. All of that feeds into understanding where problems are happening and gives a deeper understanding of what the problems are. Now, Rob also told me that it's important to automate where you can. And I know a lot of folks think that DevOps is, it's all about the automation. But even the unicorns of DevOps don't get to 100%. And so it's really about being choosy and finding the right places to do automation. Now, Dynatrace can bring this kind of virtual team idea. It really helps solve for the kind of sprawl that happens that in a modern software age with cloud applications and microservices kind of proliferating everywhere. It gets harder and harder to really understand how to pull all of the information together. And so using an AI to help with that is really helpful at taming the noise. And then Rob shared a point that I think you would have heard some of the other folks share too, about shared tooling across teams. It's really useful when the dev team and the ops team can look at the same set of information so that they aren't arguing over what the actual problem is. Now, if you are interested in learning more, there are a set of Dynatrace integrations in the marketplace that we hope you will check out from the resources section. You can learn more about Dynatrace itself if you haven't used it. And we'd like you to browse and the broad set of monitoring and observability tools that are available from our marketplace. And then here's just a quick recap of what we covered. First, the benefits of the overall Atlassian DevOps ecosystem and an integrated tool chain approach give you flexibility to evolve as your own team grows. We also hope you understand how it would help create a unified DevOps team, breaking down silos and integrating practices. And we also hope that you understand our ecosystem allows you to quickly discover and experiment easily with this set of marketplace partners, some of whom we've highlighted today. And then concretely, we did cover 4 specific things. So for Jira and Bitbucket, there are tools out there for Agile Testing, DevSecops, feature flagging, and then monitoring and observability. And so what we hope you will do is learn more about the partners in this webinar, more about what they do and how they integrate with us. We hope you'll join some of or hope you'll browse the marketplace itself and look for the right DevOps apps and integrations that maybe we didn't talk about today. And then check out our DevOps principles and best practices. There's a whole set of practice level information that we hope you'll find useful. And I guess last but not least, if you haven't signed up for Jira and Bitbucket, boy, I hope you'll take a look. We now have an early access of a new DevOps capabilities inside of Jira that we hope you will try out.